All right, my name is Tom Browne, and I worked at the campus from November of 1990 to, I'm sorry, November of 1980 to November of 1990.
And that was after the old main building has closed, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So what contact did you have with the old main building after it closed?
I was a safety and security officer at that facility, and one of my responsibilities was to maintain the security of the structure. This was to ensure that people weren't getting in there, and there were some valuable items there, and that was another thing that we were concerned about, that these things would vanish. And this was before we had assigned the UPC codes. They had a team of people come in and do that, but prior to that we really didn't have an inventory of any of the things that had been left behind when they closed the building. So that security was generally part of my function there, and also additionally fire security was the primary goal, is to protect the building and keep it from burning down.
What was the condition of the building in 1980?
Pristine. It had been freshly painted. There had been an enormous amount of renovation work done to try to bring it up to specifications for a hospital. Unfortunately, I think that the costs became prohibitive, and they just gave up on it. There was an issue with an elevator. They had tried to put an elevator in, and from what I understand, the cost would have been prohibitive. They just gave up on the idea.
And when we talk about the building in 1980, that includes the original 1843 structure as well as the wings. Is
Correct.
That correct?
That's correct.
And they were all intact?
They were in excellent condition, yes.
Okay. And what was in the building? What sorts of things?
There were still some of the industrial oak furniture. There were some benches. There were still some tables left behind. Little by little, that was moved into other areas. The old kitchen in the center of the building is what had been used as a storage. I don't think that I have ever seen so many IBM Selectric typewriters in my life as were stacked up down there. And word processing at the time was expanding, and the old Selectric was on its way out. But there were the dictograph machines. There's just a whole lot of stuff that came out of the offices that they stuffed away down there. And it was fairly secure. We had to access special keys. Our key ring had keys to just about every place except the inner offices. And that was a special key. We had to sign out where they were storing this because it did have value. And there was all kinds. There were movie projectors. There were just all kinds of things in this big storage area. And but the main building in the section had been pretty much emptied out. The cupboards were all emptied out. There was no more linens or anything like that in there. And a lot of the framing things that had done to service the patients, so it was still there. And that came out little by little. The shop people came up, the carpenters and whatnot, and they took a lot of it out of there because it was Class A flammables. Most of it was wood stuff. And it was a thought that if that ever got going, that the building would be in worse shape, you know. And but over years, they just eventually broke all that down, and I don't know what they did with it. They probably took it out and took it to the dump.
And what happened to the building over the 10 years that you were there? What sort of changes occurred?
What the main thing that we noticed was that the roof was leaking, and it was taking on water. Water was leaking pretty profusely in many different areas, and what we noticed, the main thing was the floors. The hardwood floors started to cup and warp, and they started to pull loose. The temperature was never much above 50 degrees. They did have steam continuing to just gradually heat the building a little bit, but it wasn't enough to dry it out. And so what we had, of course, is the paint flagging coming off the walls. Within 6-7 years, the place became dangerous. There were a lot of areas that we didn't dare walk in. And it got to be a point where the only place that I felt safe going was actually in the basements, because that was okay, you know. And But the upper floors were getting pretty dangerous. And
And was that in all areas of the building, the original 1843 section as well as the wings?
yes,
Or-
yeah, it was all deteriorating. Some of it direct, some of it secondary. Okay, just simply dirt and gravel and dust and whatnot. Yeah, it was. There were not. The only pristine, the only area that remained, oddly enough, was the director's office. And you could walk in there, and for some reason, the teak and the wood and all that paneling and that wonderful stuff that they had in there, that remained unscathed. And the rest of it, though, was in just a very sad state of repair. And it was kind of sad to see it, like that, watching year after year getting worse.
And what eventually happened with the roofs? The old main building is still there, the original structure.
The
wings are taken off.
They had contracted for somebody to come in, and I think what it was a stopgap thing. And these guys, whoever they contracted to do this, they had a tar bucket that was out there. It seemed like it was out there for 2 years before these fellows ever did any work. I don't know if it was a question of, what they weren't being paid or what it was, but they were supposed to come in and they were supposed to seal the leaks, the idea, and then there was supposed to be a better structure put in, a more permanent fix. The time I was there, I never saw any of it. So by the time I left in 1990, the building was in a real rough shape.
The wings were still standing at that
Yes,
time?
they were. They were. You could actually walk through most of them. There were a couple of sections that we were prohibited. We had signs up, "Do not enter." The floors had actually collapsed, and the sections of the wing were very, very bad.
Do you know when those wings were taken down?
It was after I left in 1990. I'm thinking probably 94, 95.
Okay. And you mentioned just a minute ago walking in the basement areas. Did the wings have basement areas as well?
Yes, they did.
So there was a lot of basement.
There was loads of basement. Yes, it was. Actually, it was quite a walk. I used to enjoy it because I would get probably an hour and 45-minute constitutional, which was how long it would take me. And this was the wings had double hallways that were not. You had to like climb through a window to get into the other one, and you'd get lost down there if you didn't understand the layout. You could be wandering around a long time till you found a way out of there. And but what I would do is I would usually come in Old Main. On the main drive side, on the right side, and I would come in and I could go up the wing, come down the back wing, go all the way up the other wing. It would take me an hour and 45 minutes to do it, and it was kind of a nice hike. And back when the floors were in good shape and it was dry down there, it was kind of nice. There was lighting down there, and I had a big mag light, which if I needed light, I had it, and. It was just kind of interesting because the right side wing was where the patients had done a lot of artwork.
Okay.
And they had drawn on the walls and the little graffiti and this and that. It was just kind of interesting reading it. And there were some personal items that had got left behind, these little, little notebooks that they had, and of course they're non-compos mentis. Some of it didn't make any sense, but one guy was a big Yankee fan. I said, this guy knows everything there is to know about the Yankees, And he was just really had a picture of Joe DiMaggio on his wall, and he was maybe something to do with the obsessive with the Yankees. But I know a lot of sane people that are obsessive with the Yankees, so so he was all right with
Clear
me.
dividing line there.
Right.
So these rooms with the artwork and the artifacts were in the wings, or in the basement of the wings, correct?
Correct. Right.
And was that the primary function of the basement? Was it all patient rooms?
From what I understand, I don't know the truth about it, okay, but from what I understand, I guess that they had very good patients that didn't have any problems living in these little rooms, and they were like half basement rooms is what they were. And they had windows, that they could leave if they wanted to. But apparently, these were patients just didn't, they were happy where they were. And so they were housing patients there. That was probably, it had to be the last function because they never repainted any of them. It was after they moved them out, which I'm sure they did when 1979, when they got them all out of there. They just never did anything. They never painted it over, never addressed that to try to turn it into something else. Structurally, A lot of loose brick, baked. It was, I'm looking at it, and the wings were not built to the same integrity that the front was. Okay, and they were. They had to come down. I don't see any way they could have saved that. I really don't. They would have fallen in on their own eventually anyway, And the structural fire escapes that they had put in, they had become decaying. They had started, their anchor points were rotting and falling away. Got to a point where we had to post all that. Like even if we had a fire in there was no way we were going to go through those doors, through those old fire escapes. And so it deteriorated. And I'm thinking, at the time, they had an army of workers there in the 50s and 60s, okay, and skilled tradesmen. They had tin knockers, they had welders, they had all kinds of, they had their own paint shop, they mixed their own paint. It was quite an operation. But little by little, they allowed those jobs, when the people retired, they just never, they canceled the job. Mm-hmm. So that army of workers that we had that used to do the maintenance, okay, little by little, they were gone. And toward the end, we were down to probably, I bet you, less than 10 people to do the maintenance work, and that just wasn't enough. All the work that was done after 1980 was mostly contract work. There were people that brought in from the outside to handle it.
Was it obvious that the basement area in the wings had some function other than housing patients?
There was a lot of, there were two, there were recreation areas for the patients there, okay, and there was inner courtyards that I understand they grew things there, okay. Now, when I was in there, there were courtyards that you couldn't see from the outside and you couldn't get to. You had to go into the building to get into these inner courtyards, and they were substantial, they were big, and we had trees growing in there. I'm going, we have to forest these trees, that's how big they had gotten, and but it looked like they had done a lot of activities as far as basketball, and they had the stage there. So there was, I think there was a lot of community activities in that nexus around the main building. Okay, we had the garden, which was not too far from there. We had the bowling alley. They had a 4-lane bowling alley, which was just kitty corner across the road from the back of the main building. So a lot of the patient activities were centered there. Were not so much Brigham building. They didn't. They later on they moved all the patients' bicycles and all the toys and stuff that they had for the patients. They moved that to Brigham, but before that, that was all stored in the Old Main, or the wings in Old Main.